Imagine staring down a crowd of up to 27,000 starving people out in a remote desert, and your entire catering budget consists of just 5 dry crackers and 2 pieces of beef jerky.
Yeah, that's the actual math behind history's most famous picnic.
Right, because you hear the feeding of the 5,000, and instantly your brain probably conjures up this, peaceful Renaissance painting, like a classic children's book illustration or something.
Oh, exactly. A serene, grassy hill, a neat little gathering, and a boy happily handing over a woven basket.
And everyone goes home full.
Uh-huh.
But when you step into the actual historical and cultural context of first-century Judea, that peaceful picnic vanishes entirely.
It really does. It's usually presented as a very safe, comforting, neatly packaged miracle, but it's not.
No, not at all. We are looking at a landscape that is politically charged, deeply coded, and just profoundly exhausted. So we have a really fascinating stack of sources for this deep dive today.
We do. We're pulling from theological commentaries, linguistic analyses, and some historical sermons, too.
And our mission is to completely unpack this famous meal. We aren't just looking at the physical logistics of, how a few loaves and fish fed a massive crowd.
Right. We're digging into why the specific menu, the exact number of leftovers, and the remote location were actually highly calculated, radical messages to a first-century audience.
Exactly. And whether you're a lifelong believer who has heard this narrative 100 times, or you're just insanely curious about ancient history, linguistics, and sociology, this deep dive is going to completely reframe how you look at this event.
Oh, absolutely. We are going to uncover the hidden codes, the ancient sociopolitics, and the profound psychological depths that are just looking right beneath the surface of the text.
So before we even get to the miracle itself, we have to understand the emotional and historical powder keg that forced Jesus and this massive crowd into the desert in the first place.
Yeah, the context is everything here.
Right. The political backdrop is just intensely dark and volatile. King Herod Antipas has just murdered Jesus' cousin, John the Baptist.
And this wasn't just like a tragic family death.
No. It was a gruesome, politically motivated execution. John was beheaded in prison, and his head was brought out on a platter during this drunken birthday banquet.
Which is just a horrifying thing to process. Jesus receives this news, and he is deeply grieving.
And at the exact same time, he's dealing with disciples who have been working around the clock. They're surrounded by so much crushing human need that they literally haven't even had time to sit down and eat a meal themselves.
Right, they're physically depleted and emotionally devastated.
So Jesus seeks a solitary place. They get in a boat and head toward the remote desert of Bethsaida over on the eastern shore of the Sea of Galilee, hoping to process the grief and, finally get a break.
It is the ultimate need for a wilderness retreat. They are navigating a region where a paranoid puppet king is executing popular prophets. The tension is just palpable.
But the crowd, however, is completely desperate. The sources tell us that the people figure out where the boat is heading, and they actually track him on foot.
Yeah, they're running along the shoreline from all the surrounding towns.
So by the time Jesus' boat lands, this desolate retreat is completely swarmed by tens of thousands of people. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, that's it.
If Jesus and his disciples were so exhausted they didn't even have time to eat, and they were mourning a horrific political assassination in the family, why didn't he just send the crowd away to grieve in peace?
That's a great question.
I mean, in our modern world, the immediate advice would be set a boundary. Protect your peace. Put your own oxygen mask on first.
That's 100% what a modern therapist would say.
Right. But instead, the text says Jesus felt something called splagnismai. And today, we use the heart symbol to represent deep love and emotion. But the ancient world approached anatomy and emotion very differently.
What's fascinating here is that to the ancient Greek and Jewish mind, the center of deep, visceral emotion wasn't the heart, it was the gut.
The gut, wow.
Yeah. The word splagnismai is practically unpronounceable for modern English speakers, but it is one of the most vital concepts in this entire narrative. The root of the word literally translates to intestines or bowels.
Which sounds kind of gross to us today.
It does. But it describes a physical yearning in the deepest part of your innards. So when the text says Jesus had compassion on the crowd, it is not describing a superficial pity or a polite feeling of sadness.
Right.
It means he was moved to the gut. It was an emotion so visceral, so intense, that it physically hurt and absolutely demanded immediate action.
He looks at this crowd, who the text describes as being like sheep without a shepherd.
Yeah.
Totally abandoned by their religious and political leaders, and his stomach just drops.
Exactly. It's a driving need to step in.
And our sources point out a beautiful theological concept embedded in that Greek word. For believers, deepening a union with Christ doesn't just mean acquiring the mind of Christ.
Right, it means developing the gut of Christ.
Yes. It means cultivating a sensitivity to human suffering that hits you right in the pit of your stomach, moving you entirely beyond passive sympathy into active physical intervention.
Jesus could not turn them away because his compassion was fundamentally tied to action.
Which is an incredibly inspiring thought, right up until you run into the sheer logistical nightmare it creates. Because that visceral compassion leads us straight into impossible math.
The math is brutal.
When evening approaches, the disciples basically stage an intervention. They come to Jesus and say, "We are in a remote place, it's late, send them away to the surrounding villages so they can buy themselves something to eat."
And it is crucial to realize the true scale of the problem they were looking at. The text explicitly says there were 5,000 men.
Just men.
Right. In that ancient patriarchal society, head counts typically only tallied the male heads of households. When scholars add in the average size of families, the women, the children, elderly dependents, that initial crowd of 5,000 scales up dramatically.
Did what, like triple that?
Easily. Estimates suggest we are looking at a crowd of anywhere between 10,000 and 27,000 people.
27,000 people. In a desolate wilderness, miles from any market. Philip, one of the disciples, does the mental math, and he completely panics.
I would panic too.
Right. He calculates that it would take 8 months of wages just to give everyone a single tiny bite of food. One of our sources gave a brilliant modern analogy for this.
Oh, the fast food math.
Yes. To feed a crowd that size today, even using the absolute cheapest fast food you can find, like Taco Bell math at maybe $4 a head,
Yeah.
you are looking at a sudden, unplanned catering bill of over $50,000.
It is a completely absurd, paralyzing situation.
But Jesus looks at his disciples and gives a command that must have sounded like a cruel joke. He says, "You give them something to eat."
It is a profound test of their faith. And their response perfectly highlights human limitation. Andrew, another disciple, manages to find a single boy who has brought a brown bag lunch.
Just 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish.
Exactly.
And we need to be very clear about what this food actually was, because the mental image most people have is completely wrong. These were not big, fluffy, artisanal sourdough loaves and giant salmon fillets.
Not at all. Barley was the food of the absolute poorest of the poor.
It was frequently used as animal fodder, right?
Yes. It was cheap, coarse, and these specific loaves were more like small, hard, flat pita wafers. And the fish were likely small, dried, heavily salted sardines from the local Magdala fisheries along the lake.
So it is essentially 5 dry crackers and 2 pieces of beef jerky. So I have to push back here.
Okay, what's your pushback?
Why did Jesus use the boys' mere lunch instead of just creating a massive feast out of thin air? I mean, he's the Lord of creation. If you were going to feed 27,000 people miraculously, what is the point of starting with 5 crackers and 2 salted sardines?
That is the crucial detail of the entire setup. Jesus certainly did not need the boys' lunch to perform a miracle.
Right.
But by requiring it, he demonstrates a recurring divine pattern. He chooses to use other people, even a socially insignificant child holding almost nothing to bless others.
Oh, I love that.
It shows the audience that no resource, no matter how small, coarse, or seemingly inadequate, is too small to be multiplied when placed in the right hands. It is a direct invitation to participate in the miracle rather than just being a passive consumer of it.
The sheer absurd inadequacy of those 5 crackers for 27,000 people forces us to stop looking at the calories and start looking at the menu itself. Because this wasn't just a meal.
No, it was a highly coded theological language.
It is like an encrypted radio transmission that only the locals would fully understand. If you were a first-century Jew sitting on that grass, you were reading a completely different menu than a modern reader does today.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the timing is our first major clue. The text specifically notes that the Jewish festival of Passover was near.
And Passover is the ultimate national celebration commemorating the Exodus, right?
Exactly. The great deliverance of Israel from slavery in Egypt under the leadership of Moses. So the crowd's collective mind is already primed to think about Moses.
That makes total sense.
And here is Jesus taking them out into the wilderness, bringing them up on a mountain, and miraculously providing bread from heaven. It exactly mirrors the manna provided in the days of Moses.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The historical parallels are wild when you stack them up.
They really are.
Moses leads the people through the waters of the Red Sea. Well, Jesus walks on the water of the Sea of Galilee shortly after this feeding. Moses intercedes to get the manna. Jesus blesses and gives the bread.
He is deliberately acting as the new Moses, stepping right into that ancient prophetic expectation from the book of Deuteronomy that God would one day raise up a prophet just like Moses.
And the symbolism goes even deeper into rabbinic tradition, doesn't it?
Oh, way deeper. The 5 loaves are not just a random inventory count. In ancient Jewish thought, bread frequently represented the Torah divine teaching.
Okay, so 5 loaves.
Represent the 5 books of the Torah, the foundational law of Moses. By multiplying these specific loaves, Jesus is signaling that he is offering them a new teaching, a new law that will satisfy their spiritual hunger completely.
Okay, I can see how bread links back to Moses and the Torah. But what about the fish? Magella sardines don't exactly scream ancient holy text to me. Was that just the local catch of the day, or is there a cipher there too?
The fish carry a brilliant dual symbolism, actually. First, there is a fascinating linguistic connection. The name Jesus is the Greek form of the Hebrew name Joshua.
Okay, try.
And in the Hebrew scriptures, Joshua's father was named Nun, which happens to be the Aramaic word for fish.
No way, that's crazy.
Yeah, and Joshua was the great leader who finally brought the Israelites out of the wilderness and into the promised land after Moses died. So there is a subtle nod to leadership and deliverance.
Okay, so that's the linguistic side.
Right, but there is also a massive eschatological or end-time symbolism at play. Ancient Jewish apocalyptic traditions spoke of a great future messianic banquet at the end of the age.
And they had a specific menu for that banquet.
They did.
Yeah.
According to these traditions, at this great feast, the righteous would dine on the Leviathan, a mythical, legendary sea creature. So serving fish in the wilderness was a subtle, coded way of announcing the messianic era you have been waiting for. That great final banquet, it is starting right here, right now, on this grass.
It is blowing my mind that a peasant's meal of sardines and crackers is actually a blazing billboard advertising the arrival of the Messiah.
It's incredible.
And this messaging didn't stop with the Jewish audience either. The early Christians took this imagery and absolutely ran with it. The fish became the famous ichthys secret code during the Roman persecutions.
Oh, the Jesus fish symbol.
Yeah, that little geometric fish symbol believers would draw in the dirt with their sandals to safely identify each other. Because the Greek word for fish, ichthys, was an acronym for Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior.
And the bread carries its own weight in the early church, too. The gospel writers use very specific, deliberate language when Jesus blesses it.
The text says he takes the bread and he gives thanks, right?
Yes, the Greek word used there is Eucharistasis.
Wow, Eucharist.
Exactly. It is the exact same Greek word used later at the Last Supper, permanently connecting this feeding in the remote desert directly to the Eucharist, or communion. Jesus isn't just presenting himself as a powerful miracle worker providing calories.
He is portraying himself as the true bread of life. He is the ultimate provision.
Exactly.
But the miracle doesn't end when the 27,000 people are full, though. The aftermath, what gets left behind in the dirt, is treated with massive importance.
Which is such an interesting detail to include.
Jesus explicitly tells the disciples to gather the fragments so that absolutely nothing is wasted. And they fill exactly 12 baskets. Now, was this just an ancient anti-littering campaign, or does the number 12 actually mean something specific here?
As practical as an ancient cleanup crew sounds, the number 12 is never an accident in biblical literature. At a baseline, it fundamentally represents the 12 tribes of Israel.
Right, that makes sense.
But the symbolism of those gathered leftovers also reaches directly back into the heart of temple worship. Inside the ancient temple in Jerusalem, there was the bread of the presence.
Those were the 12 specially baked loaves.
Yes, 12 loaves that were kept continually on a golden table before God, representing the 12 tribes constantly in the divine presence.
But wait, the priests were the only ones allowed to eat those specific loaves on the Sabbath, right?
Exactly. And there is a deeply fascinating Talmudic tradition from the Second Temple era regarding those 12 loaves. At that time, there could be over 1,000 priests on duty in the temple on any given Sabbath.
But there were still only 12 loaves to share among them.
Right. Yet the Talmudic tradition states that when God's favor was resting upon the nation, a profound miracle occurred. A priest could eat a piece of that bread no bigger than a single tiny crumb, and he would be miraculously, completely satiated with leftovers still to spare.
That is amazing.
So by gathering 12 baskets of miraculously multiplied leftovers in the desert, Jesus is directly connecting this remote, dusty meal to the absolute holiest place in Judaism. He is showing the crowd that the divine presence is no longer confined to a stone building in Jerusalem.
The temple is standing right there in the wilderness with them.
Precisely.
There is a beautiful linguistic nugget tied to those leftovers, too. The specific Greek word used for those broken fragments is klasma.
Klasma, yeah.
Decades later, early Christians adopted that exact same word to symbolize the gathering of the agrapha, which are the non-canonical, unwritten sayings and oral teachings of Jesus.
Oh, that's such a rich connection.
Isn't it? The physical act of the disciples gathering the leftover bread perfectly mirrored the spiritual act of the early church gathering, preserving, and transmitting his teachings to future generations. They wanted to make sure absolutely nothing of value would be lost to history.
It perfectly illustrates that the true sustenance he offered was never meant to disappear after a single afternoon meal. It was meant to be carried forward, feeding people spiritually long after the original crowd had dispersed.
But here's the tragic irony of this entire event. Despite the intense, gut-wrenching compassion, despite the coated Torah loaves and the Joshua fish,
And despite the 12 baskets mirroring the holiest bread in the temple itself.
yeah, the crowd completely misses the point.
They absolutely do. They experience the physical miracle, but they entirely misinterpret the spiritual mission.
The very next day, they track Jesus down again on the other side of the lake. But Jesus immediately calls them out. He tells them essentially, "You aren't looking for me because you saw miraculous signs and understood who I am. You are looking for me because you ate the loaves and had your bellies filled."
They didn't want a savior. They wanted an ancient vending machine or a magical caterer.
They wanted kingdom food stamps.
Right. They wanted all the physical benefits of a king filer, free food, guaranteed security without any of the spiritual transformation or discipleship.
The contrast Jesus draws for them is stark, isn't it?
Very. He commands them not to work for food that spoils, but for food that endures to eternal life. He is challenging them to look past their immediate physical poverty and seek lasting spiritual sustenance.
And of course, human nature being what it is, the crowd immediately asks, well, what must we do to perform the works God requires?
We always want a checklist. We are obsessed with earning our keep.
So what does this all mean? Jesus tells them that the only work required by God is the work of faith, simply to believe in the one he sent.
That's the core message.
And this desire to, earn a miracle isn't just an ancient Judean problem. It is a fundamental human flaw. Our sources highlighted a brilliant modern parallel to this mindset with a historical account of a man named Captain G.
Oh, the steamboat captain.
Yes, he was a 19th century steamboat captain in St. Louis, widely known as the most ungodly, rough-around-the-edges man in town. He started attending meetings with a local preacher and spent weeks losing sleep, desperately trying to figure out what he had to do to fix his ruined life.
He was trying to buy the bread, essentially.
Exactly. He read the Bible frantically, he prayed, he gave his money away, but he still felt completely broken. He begged the preacher to give him a physical task, something tangible to work on to earn his peace.
And the preacher's response flips that deeply ingrained human script entirely.
It really does. The preacher had him read Romans chapter 4, verse 5, which explicitly says, "To him that worketh not, but believeth." Captain G was furious.
He wanted a task.
Right. He kept demanding to know what his specific part in the transaction was. And the preacher finally looked at him and said, "There was something to do, but it's already been done. The work is finished. You simply have to trust it."
And that's when it finally clicked for him.
Yeah. Captain G leaped up from his chair and shouted, "I will accept that proposition." He finally realized that the bread was a gift. You don't earn the bread, you just eat it.
This raises an important question for you, the listener, as you consider this historical narrative today. Are we acting like consumers, constantly looking for a quick fix for our immediate physical problems?
Or are we seeking the bread of life that actually endures?
Exactly. Are we just following the crowd for the free lunch, or are we willing to sit in the wilderness, trust the provision, and receive the teaching?
And what is truly amazing is who gets to receive that teaching. Because meals in the ancient world were the ultimate theaters of social boundaries.
Oh, absolutely. You did not just sit down and eat with anyone.
Eating together meant acceptance, loyalty, shared status, and covenant. It was fiercely restricted by nationality, ideology, and purity laws.
Yeah.
But out of that Bethsaida desert, Jesus breaks every single rule. He feeds everyone indiscriminately.
As our sources impartially note, he didn't care about their tribal affiliations, their political loyalties, or their social standing. He just offered radical, miraculous hospitality to absolutely anyone who sat down on the grass.
And he proves that this radical inclusivity is not a one-off anomaly either.
No, he repeats it. Just a short time later in the Gospel narratives, Jesus performs a remarkably similar miracle, feeding a crowd of 4,000 people. But the crucial detail is the change in location. He performs the second feeding in the region of the Decapolis.
Which is distinctly non-Jewish Gentile territory.
And notice the shift in the numbers there. This time, after the Gentile crowd is fed, there are exactly 7 large baskets of leftovers gathered.
7. Okay, what does that mean?
In biblical numerology, 7 is the number of divine completion and perfection. By repeating the miracle for the Gentiles and leaving 7 baskets, Jesus is undeniably proving that the messianic banquet is expanding. The table is thrown wide open.
It is no longer just for the 12 tribes of Israel. It is for the complete whole world. Both Jews and Gentiles, insiders and outsiders, are invited to eat until they are entirely satisfied.
It is an incredible historical and theological journey we've been on today.
It really is. We started with Jesus grieving in a boat, feeling that gut-wrenching visceral splanchnizomai for a massive, exhausted crowd.
Then we watched a logistical nightmare. A $50,000 fast food bill on a desert hillside turn into a deeply coded feast.
Where poor man's barley and dried sardines announced the arrival of the new Moses and the fulfillment of the Torah, we saw 12 baskets of fragments linking a dusty hillside to the holiest bread in the temple.
And we witnessed a radical inclusivity that shattered ancient social boundaries and opened the ultimate banquet to the entire world. It truly is a masterpiece of historical and theological signaling.
It is.
But there is a final, rather haunting detail in this narrative that we have to consider before we close.
What did we miss?
Despite living through the feeding of the 5,000, despite personally holding the multiplied bread in their own hands, and despite physically gathering those 12 baskets of fragments, when the disciples later found themselves with that crowd of 4,000 in Gentile territory, they panicked all over again.
Wait, really?
Yes. They actually asked Jesus, where could we get enough bread in this remote place to feed such a crowd? They had completely, entirely forgotten the profound miracle they had just lived through.
Wow. They suffered from total spiritual amnesia.
Which leaves you with this final thought to mull over. Think about the baskets of fragments in your own life, those past moments where you were provided for when the math seemed utterly impossible, when the situation was completely desolate.
That's powerful.
If you do not actively gather and remember those fragments today, will you, like the disciples, completely forget them the very next time you find yourself hungry and exhausted in the wilderness?
That is a profound place to land. Don't leave your fragments in the grass. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep looking past the surface, and keep exploring. We'll catch you next time.